In 1994, I went to China and Thailand for 2 months. I spent a month in China and a month in Thailand, and we were traveling cheap. We talked to other backpackers to decide where we were going to travel to next. And Yangshuo was one of our first locations we went to. I'd hiked out to the river a few days earlier, and the angle wasn't right. So we ate all of our meals at a place called Lisa's Cafe, and Lisa could speak English. So I asked Lisa if she could hire me a fisherman on the bamboo boat with the cormorant birds and the traditional garb. She said yes, she could do that. And I said I wanted to be on the bow of about a 30-foot boat so I wouldn't have any movement when I was trying to take these pictures early morning. And she said, yes, they could do that. And I said, well, I wanted to be on the river at about 5:30. And she looked at me and she said, what's the matter? Are you crazy? And so anyway, we were out there at 5:30. And if you look really close underneath the lantern, there's a plastic bag there with a flash on a radio slave. And so my thought process was to get the light to shine back at the fisherman, to give it an effect like he was getting light from the lantern on the front of the little boat. Well, it was way too bright, but when I fired that, all the men on the boat looked at me and said, wow, you magic man. And so after that, I had a little more respect for them. They had a little more respect for me. So for the next hour, I had Lisa call out to the fisherman and have him go back and forth until I could get the right composition to capture this image the way I wanted it. Now for composition, I flipped the negative before I printed it because Americans read left to right. If the fishermen were on the other side of the image, your eye would go to the fisherman and it would go right on out of the image because that's the direction the boat was going. And then I also utilized the rule of thirds. If you divide this image into thirds horizontally and vertically, it will give you 4 intersection points. And those intersection points are where you want to put the subject. So by flipping the image, it put the fisherman in one of the intersection points for composition. This next image was of a Buddha taken in northern Thailand near Mae Sai, and the Buddha is looking towards Myanmar. This was also taken in 1994 on film, and it was scanned scanned negative, and then once I got it into Photoshop, I manipulated it and converted it to a black and white image. This is printed as a 5-foot image, and a lot of that was done through an action called Res Up, where it will enlarge the image at 10% at a time so the computer won't interpolate. So basically, you can take a small image and make a large image and not have much loss of resolution. I also used some sharpening and increasing of canvas, and since I was printing on canvas, the texture would help absorb some of the contrastiness of it. Another form of light is called blue light, and this occurs just before sunset and just after sunset when the light has a bluish cast to it. This image is not in the show, but it's a good illustration of blue light. This one is titled Blue Sunset, and it was taken in Green Bay, Wisconsin a few years ago. And it was just about the time sunset, and it was wintertime, it was cold, and it just has that blue light to it. This next image was taken in Ireland at sunset at Sleigh Head. This is a 30-second HDR image. I did that as an HDR so I could pick up all the detail in the rock wall on the right side, and I could also pick up all of the detail in the grass and on the cliff and retain the blue in the sky. By doing an HDR, it gave me a greater dynamic range than what you could capture with a single exposure. And then by shooting the 30-second time exposure, I was able to get the water to go soft. And so yeah. This next image is a scanned negative from China. And this is a good use of the rule of thirds for composition. And this was taken in an area called the Stone Forest near Kunming. We found this in Lonely Planet Guidebook, and it sounded interesting, but this area does not have many tourists from America. We felt like we were the only ones, and the people really noticed us because I'm tall and I really stood out from everybody else. This image was taken in Yangshuo, China, and this was the view from the bridge when I was wanting to photograph the fishermen in the traditional garb. It's obvious that this was not taken in America because of the shape of the boats and the round mountains in the background. And this is a good example of the diagonal composition with the leading lines. This next image is of the terraced farming in China. Having grown up on a farm, and I used to farm, I found their farming practices very interesting in China. We had taken a drive on a bus through an area that had terraced farming all the way to the top of the mountains. And so we hired a driver and went back to this area. And that's where this one was taken, and this one with the bamboo floating down the river. It reminded me of Gatlinburg area, except that there had terraced farming all the way to the top of the hills, and there were no guardrails. And notice the location of the man floating the bamboo. It's in the correct position for the rule of thirds. In February of 2002, I went to Thailand again, but this time it was a 2-week trip with several photographers, a guide, and an interpreter. I was using a Canon D60, which was a 6-megapixel camera. And then I had 3 L lenses with me. And we spent the first 5 days in Bangkok and visited lots of temples and went shopping every day. Then we went north to Chiang Mai to photograph some of the indigenous people of Thailand, and we rode elephants and rafted down the Mekong River. This was 6 months after 9/11, and there were not many people traveling to Thailand on vacation at that time. We visited several places that I had visited when I was in Thailand in 1994, and it was interesting to see how much things had changed. One afternoon, we gave up our passports to go into Myanmar for a few hours to photograph. This photograph is titled The Lookout, and it was taken on a dirt street where we were walking. The detail in this photograph is incredible considering that this was shot with a 6-megapixel camera. And the photo is printed 38 inches by 54 inches on canvas. And notice this placement of the subject for composition. The detail on this is sharp enough that you can read every bit of the writing on that poster on the front, and you can see the catch lights in the little boy's eye. When we were in Thailand in 2002, we visited the floating market. This one was shot with a long lens, wide open. So the center of the image, everything is very sharp. And then the image, the people at the bottom of the photograph and the top of the photograph are slightly out of focus. It is full of color and movement, and it just gives an idea of everything that they were selling that day on the river. This photograph was taken in Myanmar on the same street as the lookout. And this one I titled Hopeless. Something about the dirt street, the way the man was standing and sitting in the middle of the street and looking at the background made me wonder about what his circumstances in life were. This was also from the 2002 trip, and every day when we were in Bangkok, we would go to temples. After a while, we visited so many temples and Buddhas that I kind of forgot the names of them. I believe I have the name on this one on the exhibit at the Art Museum. This was an open air market in Bangkok, near the floating market, and there were bags and bags of peppers everywhere. This is another temple in Bangkok. And the detail was incredible. If you saw a close-up, it's incredible on how they put this temple together. It was amazing. This is a photograph in the salt flats near Bangkok. And it was interesting because this was probably 4 or 5 miles from the ocean, but they'd let the salt water in. And it'd be a couple inches thick. And when they saw the salt start to crystallize, then they would rake it into piles. And it was very warm that day. It was probably close to 90 degrees. And we were amazed at how many clothes all these people had on. And they kind of indicated that it was because of the heat. And there were a couple of these people that I did close-up portraits of, and then showed them their picture on the back of the camera. And they were amazed. They had never seen anything like that before. This is another shot of the boat at the floating market in Bangkok. It was interesting, all of the things they would sell in the markets, both on the floating market and well, on this one, you can see in the next boat up, it looks like they're selling butterflies. In September of 2019, we visited Ireland for 16 days with a group of photographers and their spouses. It was an incredible trip considering what we saw for the amount of time we were there. One photographer in the group, Jim Hamill, had been to Ireland several times and knew the area well, and he put together the itinerary to see some of the most picturesque areas of Ireland. When we arrived in Dublin, we went north to photograph the dark hedges near Belfast. Then we went to the southwest coast for the next 2 weeks. Because we had spouses on the trip that may or may not want to get up at 6 a.m. and hike into castle ruins, Jim made an itinerary of choices for every day. You could choose between ambitious, suggested, or casual for every day on the trip. These first 2 images were taken in the harbor where we were supposed to take a boat to go to Skellig Michael Island. The weather was not conducive for riding in a small boat to get to the island, so our boat trip was canceled. This harbor photograph is a panorama that I shot by shooting 10 photographs vertically and then stitching it together in Photoshop. I was very impressed with the detail in the photo. The 2 images together are 26 inches high and 122 inches long. And the detail is so sharp, you can read the license plates on the vehicles in the background. So this is a good suggestion for you. If you're going on a trip and you see a view that you really want to capture, instead of taking a super wide angle lens that adds weight to your bag, shoot it vertically and stitch it together in Photoshop. The detail will be much greater than if you just have a single image. I have done this on several occasions, and I have one photograph hanging in Bailey Hall at Purdue that's an 8-foot image of 350 men on stage at Elliott Hall, and you can read the name of the music on the people in the front row. I've always been intrigued by infrared photography. I used to shoot infrared film, and it's not easy because of the steps you had to take. You had to load and unload the camera in total darkness. And older film lenses would have an infrared focus shift where you needed to set your focus. You can Google that to get more information if you're interested. Once I had newer digital camera bodies, I sent my old D60 Canon camera body to have the sensor converted so that it would shoot only black and white infrared. I like having a converted DSLR body because then I can use all my lenses in my toolbox for color or for infrared photography. So now like I said, my infrared body, I take it along on most shoots so I can shoot color and or black and white. Sometimes people like it, sometimes people don't. I like it. So with an infrared black and white image, the grass and trees go white and sky goes black. I like the look, but not everyone does. The first image I'm going to show you is the finished infrared image and then a color photo taken at the same location. I feel the infrared image is more dramatic than the color image. The infrared photo was taken near Belfast, and this is an area called the Dark Hedges, and this location was used for some of the scenes in Game of Thrones. Now, to me, this has a lot of impact because of the light on the tree branches and the fact that you can see the grass on either side between the trees. This is a narrow road that's lined with these very large old beech trees, and they intertwine and go over the top of the road. And you can see in the color image, it's very interesting. But to me, the infrared just has a lot more impact than the color image. This infrared photo was taken on the front of the Purdue Memorial Union, and this was taken in the middle of the day on a bright sunny day. To me, this looks a whole lot better than the color because the bushes that spell out Purdue really stand out. The color image, the bushes blend with the green grass in the foreground. This next photo is of a castle I photographed in Ireland. And on this one, I specifically put the castle at the top of the image because with infrared and the grass going white, I used the leading line of the path to lead you to the castle. And if you do this same concept of putting the castle at the top in the color, it doesn't have the same impact because the leading line blends with the grass in the foreground. This shot is not in the show, but this is an image I took at the Indiana Dunes State Park many years ago. And I never entered it or did anything with it because the background is out of focus. So then I came up with a title that brings your attention down to the fence. And I came up with the title of Weathered by Time. And then it won some awards and it got published. Now there's some other variations on infrared photography, and this is one of them. When you take an image out of your infrared camera, it comes out looking red. And there's several steps you have to go through to get the image to look black and white. You have to go in channels and you have to adjust levels in every channel. And there's a few other steps you have to do too. So if anybody's interested in infrared photography, contact me later. I'll be glad to explain all of it to you, but there's really not time to go through all those steps here. But anyway, this is one where I did some adjustments in channels and in levels to bring some of the color back on an infrared image. And this is a series of boats at Ross Castle in Ireland. This is the same type of thing where I adjusted the color in an infrared image. To me, this has a lot more impact than the black and white version of the same photograph, because with the colorized version of the infrared, the headstones really stand out from each other, and they're not, they stand out more than if they were just all the same color of black and white. This is taken at the cemetery at Rock of Cashel. This is Hovde Hall at Purdue University campus, and this is taken with side lighting. And the side lighting really lights up the columns on the front of Hovde Hall, and it also gives me direct sunlight on the leaves that are framing Hovde Hall. And we didn't have any clouds that day, but I did have this jet streak, or the jet trail, that's pointing down towards the one student walking across in front of Hovde Hall. Here's another variation on adding some color back into an infrared image, and this is of hay bales and crows, and this was in the field right next to the image of dark hedges. I don't know if you noticed when the dark hedges image, you could see the hay bales off on the right-hand side. This is taken in Ireland at one of the overlooks, and it's a good example of accent lighting that comes through when the hole in the clouds opens up and you just get the spot lighting. This was taken in Ireland. I don't remember the exact location because there were sheep everywhere. If you've been to Ireland, you know what I'm talking about, but it was interesting because we saw so many sheep. They'd be on the road, you come around the corner, you have to stop for the sheep. And I was thinking, how can the farmers tell these sheep apart? Well, if you look at them, they have different colored markings on them. And we found out that's, that's how they determine ownership. So you'll see them with blue markings, green, red, all these different colored markings on their coat, and that's how they determine who they belong to. Here's another infrared image from Purdue University, and this is at Purdue Armstrong Hall with Purdue Arch in the foreground, and I used the arch to kind of frame Armstrong. I like it with the infrared because the trees go white and it really highlights the arch and Armstrong Hall in the background. And this is another one at Purdue University, and this is the Continuum, which is a large sculpture in front of Lynn Hall, which is home to the College of the Veterinary Medicine at Purdue University. When we first arrived in Ireland, we went to Trinity College, to the library there to get this photograph. Now, I love this photograph. I love the converging lines. I love the barrel ceiling. And what I love most, there's no tourists in the picture. This was not my idea originally. Jim Hamill, that I talked about earlier, he had went on one of his previous trips, he had gone to the library to photograph it, because at the ends of all of the stacks of books, they have busts of famous people. And he wanted to get that picture, but it was full of tourists. And he finally got frustrated of waiting for the tourists to leave. So he took this identical picture, entered it in competition, and it won a lot of awards. So we went there thinking maybe there wouldn't be tourists and we could get a picture without the tourists. But no, it was full of tourists. So I took the same picture Jim did, and I like it. I love the converging lines, and it's a great image. This is Rock of Cashel in Ireland. It's a very famous castle ruins that a lot of people go to. We got there early in the morning before it was full of tourists. There's one thing that you've probably heard me mention tourists more than once now. I really dislike having people in my images, especially when I'm photographing castles or, well, just about everywhere. I think places look a lot better if you don't have a bunch of tourists running around with cameras. So that's one of the things I loved about our trip to Ireland. Most of the places we hiked into, they were remote enough or we were early enough that we didn't have to deal with other people in our images. I remember when we went to, I just lost the name of it, a very famous touristy place, and Jim said, oh, Cliffs of Moher. Jim said it will be full of tourists and tourist buses, and it was. And yes, I got some nice pictures, but I preferred where we had to hike in and see the castle ruins. That was fabulous for me. This is the Hoare Abbey, and this is right across the street from Rock of Cashel that was in the previous image. In fact, I took this picture through a small opening in a window looking towards Hoare Abbey. So this was taken from Rock of Cashel looking across the road to the Abbey. This is an HDR image that was taken at Sleigh Head. This day, the light was fabulous. We started that morning. It was raining, it was blustery, it was windy, it was cold. And then the sun had come out and then it'd go under and the sun had come out. It was like that all day, but it was such a beautiful day for capturing the light. And that's what impressed me about this photograph was the light. You have this wonderful light coming in on the stone wall and the grass and the hillside, but you still got blue sky. And then you've got like a stormy area on the left side of the image. And by shooting it as an HDR, I could capture a greater dynamic range than you could capture with a single image. But that I loved the lighting that day. It was one of my favorite days in Ireland. This was taken in a cemetery on Innismore Island, and this was in a wall on the interior wall of a cemetery, and the small opening there was where somebody had placed some personal belongings or effects of somebody who had recently departed. So I was going to just shoot the opening and a close-up of the details of that, but I really liked the way all of the moss and the ferns were growing out of the rock. So the more I composed my image, the farther back I got, and I placed the window where I did for composition for the rule of thirds. I probably should have gotten another picture of just the close-up of the details within the window, but I think I prefer this image over just the details. So when we were staying at Ballyonhinch Castle, we took a boat tour one day where we were going out to check lobster pots. And so there were about half of our group, half of us went in the morning and half of us went in the afternoon. We went on the morning trip and the tide was out. And so we got on this island to photograph. Actually, we went out and checked a couple of lobster pots, and he pulled up some lobster traps and showed us that. And we tried fishing and we caught nothing. And he said, well, it's probably because it's low tide, but we can go to this island instead. So we went to the island and we photographed, and I titled this The Red Boat, just because all of the rest of the tones are very similar. And if you look on the right side, you can see a red boat. This was probably my favorite place we hiked into. The one day we left our lodging at 6 a.m. in the morning and drove 2.5 hours to Three Castle Head. And then we hiked into it as a couple of kilometer walk to get back to it. And it was fabulous. Several people on the trip had drones, and their drone photography, if you saw this image as a drone photograph, it is amazing because you have the remains of the three castles here on a lake, but off on the left-hand side, it is a sheer drop off to the ocean. And then if you look off to the right, the lake goes back a little farther, but it was one of my favorite places to photograph. And I think because of the sheer beauty of it, the disadvantage was it was on private land, and that's why you do see a fence there. I suppose I could have taken that out in Photoshop, but I didn't. I left it in and left, it's pretty much the way I shot it. I did take a polarizing filter and neutral density filters with me. And this is a slow shutter speed image so I could get soft water. So I wouldn't have the ripples on top of the water, and it would look much smoother for the reflection. This path is on the island of Ennismore. We took the ferry out to the island for the day, and then we were lucky enough to find there was only about half of the group went, but we found somebody with a van that was big enough to take all of us, and we spent a couple hours with him, and he showed us the highlights of the island, and then took us to the highest point where they could drive, and then we hiked up to the Agnes Fort for the view up on top. It was difficult to photograph up at the fort because it had a high wall and then it just had a sheer drop off to the ocean. So there was no way of really getting a picture of, unless you had a drone, there was no way of getting a picture of the drop off. You could see the wall and it was a wonderful hike going up, but this was a view of the path going back to the little town where we started. So when I talked earlier about going out with the lobster fishermen, and we pulled up the lobster pots, and we didn't catch any fish. Well, this was on that same little island where we went to photograph. The other group that went out in the afternoon, they caught fish. In fact, they caught so many fish that the restaurant where we were staying cooked fish for everybody that night, just from what the other group caught. But they didn't get the opportunity to go to this island to photograph. So this is at the Hoare Abbey ruins, and this is across the street from the Rock of Cashel. And I shot this image as an HDR so I could pick up the detail in the walls, the stone walls on both sides, and I could pick up the detail in the shadow area on the front of the altar and still get blue sky at the top. This is beyond the dynamic range of a single image, and so I had to shoot as an HDR to get the detail in the shadow area and retain the blue in the sky at the top. This is out at Ennismore Island. And when I talked earlier about the details, the memories of somebody in a stone wall, in the middle of a wall, it looked like a picture frame in a wall, that was at this location on the backside of one of these, of this structure in the background. And this is a photograph of the Hoare Abbey again. And I picked this angle because I liked the lines and angles of it. Sometimes I think angles are more interesting than just shooting square or shooting straight on, and I liked picking up the detail of all of the moss growing out of the walls. So that concludes my talking about seeing the light. And if you're interested in more information about any of what I've talked
Hey, Ed, accidentally muted there.
Okay, so my
Sorry about that.
for all of you is this. When you're walking around town or your neighborhood, look for the light. Notice the subtle changes in the shadows on cloudy days and sunny days. Seeing the light is being able to see the differences in the light and shadows when viewing in different seasons and different times of the day. Get out of the house and enjoy the colorful Indiana sunsets. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. This has just been really beautiful. We did have a question from Rob Galbraith in the chat earlier. Rob wanted to know that when you're shooting infrared with your camera, what do you see through the viewfinder? Do you see infrared or do you see in color? I was thinking in my experience that you just see the same thing and it shows up on the film.
You see infrared when you look through the viewfinder because the sensor's been converted. And when you look at it on the back of the camera, it looks like infrared. But when you open it in Photoshop, it's red. So it takes some work to get it back to looking like infrared image again.
Very cool.
The infrared camera is also very sensitive to light. So you can have one exposure looking here. You can move just a short distance and the exposure is totally different because it's much more sensitive to light than it is when it's on color settings or a color camera.
Very nice. Very nice to know. Yeah, I've always wanted to work in infrared. Colleen O'Brien wanted you to know that your photos are absolutely stunning and very beautiful. And another Mary in the group said, yes, they're absolutely gorgeous. So I'm going to let y'all unmute yourselves to ask Ed questions if you'd like. If I can do this. Yep, I think so. Somebody can try that out. You basically would have to unmute yourself. John Schnar?
Yeah.
Question?
No, I just unmuted myself. I just said, hi, Ed. Enjoyed it.
Comments are welcome as well. You don't have to have a question, you know. Ed's with us for a little while longer.
Yep.
I got a question. This is John Schneer. Ed, how expensive is it to change the sensor in your cameras for infrared?
I can send you a link to a company that specializes in it. It has a lot more information on the website. And you can send an old digital camera if you have an old body you're not using, or if you want a specific camera, they have brand new cameras that are already converted that they sell.
I'm not spending any money on a new camera. I got plenty of old ones.
Okay, if you send an old one, it'll cost about $350 to have the sensor converted.
Okay.
Then you have choices. You can have it converted to be color infrared, which gives you weird colors, or you can have 3 choices of black and white infrared. Mine was a 590 conversion, which means a little color still comes through, and you can also get a 720 or an 850. And on the 720 or an 850, it's pretty much straight black and white.
Okay, thank you. I will send you my email to your website.
Great.
Okay, I have an obscure question for you. I don't know because I haven't looked lately, but are there any places these days that still sell traditional black and white film and actually do the traditional printing these days?
Yes, there are. I think I'm sure, check with Camera Outfitters. I'm sure they can get black and white film for you. You can get black and white film processed either through them, or if the problem is if you send it to a lab, it's more expensive than digital because it'll be hand developed. And then what they'll do is they will scan everything and you'll get digital copies back. You'll have second generation.
Wow. Okay, that is different. Definitely different. So therein lies the question. I mean, if they can do it, then there might be another online source somewhere where you can get this stuff
Actually,
to
if
do yourself.
there's people involved with the Purdue Camera Club, they do processing over at Purdue in the basement of the Union.
Oh, great.
Yes.
That is great. I come from a long line of photographers in my family. My great grandfather was a photographer around 1900, and as a college project, I developed some of his glass plate negatives as contact prints at the lab.
You have those?
I do, and I put those into some archival sleeves, and they're protected at this time. So some of them are 8x10s, some are
Right.
4x5s.
I've got some
cool.
Glass negatives that I've acquired over the last couple of years, and a lot of them are 4x16 group photographs, a group of people.
Yes.
And some 8x10 too.
Yeah. I understand from doing a little bit of research, if anybody knows me at the art museum, I live for research and I love to dig into history. But I did a little bit of digging and I found out that around 1900, 1910, a camera was made to be more portable. And so everybody and his brother started learning how to take pictures around 1900. They started selling it by catalog, so you could get the things to develop at your own house. And I imagine that's exactly how my great grandfather got into it, was right around a little bit before 1900.
Right. Well, back in the 50s, I did photography in 4-H, and my mother let me use her Kodak fold-out camera, and that's what I used until I could afford to buy something better.
Yeah.
And back then, my dream was either to be a National Geographic photographer or collect butterflies around the world.
A tough call. Absolutely. I love a good butterfly and nature. It's a hard one. So yeah, I do remember my first camera. Maybe somebody else has memories about their first camera, but my first one was a little tiny Instamatic that my father had from the early 50s, late 50s, early 60s. And they didn't even make flash bulbs for those anymore when I started trying to use it in 76. So only outdoor pictures. A little
when I got
Instamatic.
started, the reason I started with a Canon camera instead of a Nikon, when I was in the Army, I was stationed in Korea, and my salary at that point was $75 a month, and I could buy a new Canon FTQL with a 1.2 lens for $145, but the Nikon FTB with a 1.4 lens was $155. So I bought the Canon. And yeah, I've stuck with Canon all these years. There's been a few times I've considered switching to Nikon, but they're both very good. And the big thing is that once you invest in good glass, you're married to that brand.
Yeah, you really are. My father did Minolta over the years, and I got I actually borrowed his for my photography classes in college. I actually have a Pentax, but like you say, once you buy it, that's what you're getting, and you're looking for it, and it gets harder if you don't go with the top ones.
Right, and I really like Canon because they have something called Canon Professional Services. So all of my cameras and lenses are registered through this service. So for example, if I drop a camera at an event on Saturday, I can mail it to them on Monday and I'll have it back by Thursday because if I need it the following weekend.
That is really good to know. That is really cool. Chris Willing actually has a question. She said she's experienced changes in her vision like many of us. These are
yes.
transitions. She's like, have you experienced the same? And does that, influence your photography and what you take pictures of?
If it wasn't for autofocus, I would probably be out of business because about the time I for years I wore hard contacts, and they got to the point where they really drove me crazy. And that's back when I was shooting Hasselblads and there was no autofocus. And then I had LASIK done, and then I had to wear glasses to see the focus. And that's about the time autofocus got a lot better. Mm-hmm. And yeah, if I cannot really see to do the fine focus anymore. The cameras are very good and I trust them.
Right. A lot of folks in the neighborhood may remember Sam Postlethwaite. I became acquainted with him over at the Lilly Nature Center many years ago, and he took scads and scads of pictures. And he walked out in his 90s over to the celery bog for a long time, and he took a camera with him with a sturdy single pod, stand on it.
Right.
But his camera was a bit different in that it actually had a viewfinder so that he could look down onto the surface. Have you tried anything like that?
Yes. When I first started taking pictures, I started with a Mamiya C330 twin lens reflex, and you look through the top, and it took 120 roll film, and the negative was 2¼ inches square. And then I had a Rolleiflex, it was the same thing. And then I went to Bronica 645s, and then I went to Hasselblad. And the Hasselblad, you look down through the top, or you could get a viewfinder where you could look straight in. And I used the Hasselblad up until when I went digital.
Yeah, very cool. So I thought maybe something like that might help Chris to get back maybe to cameras, if you're not having to be quite so close to it, but I don't know.
Well, the big problem.
I think she's trying to ask a question, but I can't quite hear her. Chris, you there? Nope, it's not her. Okay. She says, nope, not me. I'll take your word for it. That's cool. So does anybody else have any questions? I don't want to hog the conversation here with Ed. I mean, I can see him every once in a while. Well, so far I'm not seeing anything, and it's about 8 o'clock, but I guess if nobody else puts any other questions in the chat here, I want to thank you very much, Ed, for your wonderful talk. And I know that it kind of follows a little bit of a travelogue because you're talking about your travel photos, but they're really exquisite. And I really appreciate your time and sharing all this information with us. And it's just a joy. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Cheryl.
Thank you. So I'm going to hang on here for just a little while longer until some folks leave and, see what happens.
Okay.
But yeah, I could talk cameras and pictures all night.
I didn't realize you had that history about cameras.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So do you have any old glass negatives of downtown Lafayette street scenes or anything?
I don't, because I'm not a native to Lafayette. I didn't grow up in Lafayette, but the photos that we do have, there were about 24 glass plate negatives that got saved from his house.
Right.
He was a house builder, a furniture builder, a photographer. He did a lot of stuff, kind of like me, I guess. But yeah, about 24 collection pieces there. He does have some of his photos wound up in the Indiana State Museum in the archives over there. So I can actually go online and look at some of them. Some of them I actually have personally, but he did take pictures of the townspeople down in Fountain County in Petersburg, where he lived. So there are some family reunion pictures where they went to southern Indiana to see some folks around 1900. But my favorite are when he took a picnic and went out to Portland Arch with some friends. So that was kind of interesting. But
you know how to copy those?
I kind of have looked at a few different ways to do it, but other than doing the contact prints and stuff like that, which was 20 plus years ago now.
I put all of mine on a white background, and then photograph the emulsion side with a macro lens, and then go into Photoshop under image down to invert, invert it to a positive.
Yeah.
And that way you got a digital file.
Right. My concern is the silver nitrate on them was getting so black, even at that time. Some of the contact prints, in the darkroom would 100th of a second made all the difference in the world on the exposure. It was ridiculous. Some of them had to be really long because, they were darker than others. But some of them were absolute surprises. One 4x5 image is actually taken in winter of heavily laden, snow-laden branches of a pine tree. And it's just incredible.
And to get perfect exposure with what they had to work with back then.
Right, with the temperature and the environment, I was flabbergasted. I couldn't read the image really to look at it, to really understand what it was. It was so dark. But when I got it developed, I was amazed.
Right. There's some lady from our church that brought me a shoebox full of 4x5 negatives. And she said that her dad always had a camera with him and he worked for the railroad.
Wow.
And a lot of the pictures are from around the Chicago area and a lot of train pictures with workers in them. And so I asked her if I could use those to sell or use for my own use. And she said, absolutely. And there's one of them of a car at Monument Circle in Indianapolis. And if you zoom in, the license plate is 1913.
Wow. That is fantastic.
And I love seeing old photographs like this.
Well, I did, like I said, I made contact prints of them all. Maybe sometime when COVID's over, I'll show you the contact prints because I made extra. Some of them are pretty wild. There's one that I developed for my grandmother particularly. It was of the house my grandfather built.
Right.
And it has her older sister sitting on the front porch with her hand fist first into a large slice of watermelon in the middle of summer. It is beautiful. It is funny. It's got a little bit of clouding on it, but still just that image to come through. I'm like, I don't know you. I never knew you when I was growing up, but this is fantastic. So good stuff like that. So yeah. So sometimes.
So I didn't go into the color infrared too much, but when I was in college, I got my degree from the University of South Florida when I lived at Clearwater Beach. And I would shoot color infrared. And of course, it was slide film. And so it has no latitude. You've got about a one-stop latitude and that's it. But if you shot it with filters, if you used a red, yellow, blue, green filter combination, you could get some really wild stuff.
Oh yeah. Yeah. My photography instructor was talking about doing some different ones, and we played around with some of them and that is pretty cool.
But of course, back then, the big thing was that you had to, since you had to figure out your filter factor for each of the filters and add that to the exposure. So that was interesting too,
Yeah, yeah. It was definitely a little bit more of a challenge.
Oh, much
Because
more than this.
every time you added one of those filters, it changed the level on that. And it
Right.
was not cool sometimes. And I totally sympathize with trying to you know, load the film onto the reels in the dark by feel because
Right.
you couldn't risk the exposure.
Hey,
I
I've
mean,
still got some infrared film in my refrigerator,
you know,
and I still got black and white in there too.
you might want to thaw it out a little bit and see if it
No,
works.
it's
I know,
as long as it's in the refrigerator, it's not going to spoil.
right, exactly. So, you know, that's cool. Was there any other questions here? I want to make sure. We've got a few people who are leaving, but I just want to make sure.
Okay, I've had several people send me a chat.
Fantastic. Let's see. I'm trying to look and see if there were any for everyone, but no. Chris Willing was the last one for that one.
Okay.
Well, if nobody has any more questions, I think we're going to sign off. If y'all want to, it's after 8 o'clock now. I don't want to keep you at your studio forever.
That's all right. I'm glad I finally learned how to do Zoom.
Yeah, it's kind of liberating, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's time for me to join the modern world, I guess.
I was struggling there for a little bit, but hey. Even when Caitlin is gone, she's not too far away. So
right.
So anyway. Well, thanks, Ed. Again.
Welcome.
And folks, I'm gonna sign us out of here, if that's okay.
And now that I know that you're interested in photography, I'll keep that in mind next time I come over there.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Because I tell you, the truth is I may have stopped painting. I may have stopped creating a lot of artwork with my hands, but I never could stop seeing. And I am so glad, even my smartphone I bought because it had a better camera than
camera. Right. Well, I know these new ones are pretty amazing.
Yeah. And this one's getting a little bit old and, but it still takes great pictures. But, Sam Postlethwaite said it best. He's like, he used to think that the camera took the pictures, and some of them are so good they do, but you have to see it first.
I always tell people it's not the camera that takes the pictures, it's what's 2 inches behind the camera.
That's true, because you have to see it there first, is what I told him.
Like when somebody says, well, what kind of camera do you use? If I use that kind of camera, I can take the same pictures.
I could use a garbage camera and still get good pictures. And I've done that. Totally. I mean, the little Kodak Instamatic with the, tiny little 3x3 pictures,
Right.
Those are pretty rustic right there, but
yeah.
But I still got some
good ones.
It's really
hard to go back and take those kind of pictures and restore them and make them look good.
That's true. I have found a couple programs that can kind of help with that. Right. If you have the negatives, I know I ditched those, it was like the first trials, as a kid, but I do still have the picture prints anyway. Right. But I did find that there are some converters for slides, to get those images and things like that direct from film, which would be really fantastic, even for color. I just am not willing to invest yet.
What are you looking at, a scanner or what?
Well, there are some scanners, yeah, but I'm just not sure.
I've got a scanner, but that will do slides, but I don't use it. I just put a macro lens on the camera and put a slide on a light.
Right. Yeah.
And photograph it.
Yeah. It seems like it would be faster and easier to do.
It is. And then each file has its own name.
Exactly. And you don't have to go
I've
through
done copy work for people, and I tell them, I give them a price, what my hourly fee is, and it's really not that expensive, but I just put down sticky notes, put the camera on a remote control on a on a tripod and put a picture in, shoot it. And, you know, if I'm doing photographs, I set up copy lights. As long as they're at 90-degree angle, there's no glare.
Right.
So.
Yeah, cool. Well, someday I'll pick your brain about more of it.
Okay. It's the stuff I got to do to stay busy, you know.
Well, you know, I get that, but I keep biting off more than I can chew, I guess, lately. So too many projects, too much stuff. Yeah. So, well, thanks so much, Ed. I really appreciate it. I know our attendees did, because a few of them are still hanging around a little bit, but still.
Oh, they probably want to talk to you after I leave.
Oh, I can't imagine that. Cannot imagine that. Oh, anyway. Well, I'm going to sign out of the meeting if that's okay with everybody.
That's fine. Thanks for all your help.
All righty. Well, you have a wonderful night. Thank you.
All right. You too.